Good morning, everyone. I am Chiara Giovannini from ANEC, the association representing consumers in standardization, with Fernando Macigato from UNE and the AccessibleEU Center, and the staff of the AccessibleEU project for this joint event about the European Accessibility Act, product and services after 28th of June. Standards underpinning the European Accessibility Act in the light of the date of application of the directive. Welcome to this one-hour webinar. Next slide. I will explain the accessibility features of today, and there is manual captioning in English. To activate the Zoom functionality, click on the CC button that appears at the bottom of your screen. Text on tap link will be shared on the chat, and I think this is already the case if you look into the chat. We also have international sign language. To watch the sign language interpreter image, you can activate the interpretation on your screen with the Zoom. To ask questions, you can use the Q&A functionality. We will collect the questions and we will do our utmost to reply to all the questions. Once more, we are very happy to be with you, so many of you today. I will now ask Fernando to upload the slides so that we can show you the program that we have prepared for you today. We will have a general presentation on the Accessibility Act with some considerations. We will then dive into the next slide, please. We will dive then into the standards. So I will explain the consumer view and the challenges that we see in the implementation of the European Accessibility Act. Fernando will explain the standards that are being developed and the expected timeline, and then we will have final question and answers. We have foreseen an important amount of time, 15 minutes, so don't hesitate to ask your questions even during the two presentations, and as mentioned, we will collect them. Next slide. What is the objective of this webinar? By the title, you know that by 28th of June of this year, so in a couple of weeks, all the services and products covered by the European Accessibility Act must meet the accessibility requirements. We have, however, standards supporting the directive that are being developed, but the deadlines are different than the original deadlines. So what are those standards? When can we expect them? And how will they help consumers? This is what we will be discussing also with your help. Next slide. So let's have a look at the European Accessibility Act and its challenges. Next slide. The European Accessibility Act is a European Union directive aimed at improving the accessibility of certain products and services for persons with disabilities across EU. It has a formal name and especially a number. It was approved in 2019, number 882. The transposition deadline by member states was June 2022. We are in the presence of a directive. As you know, a directive requires national implementation with national legislation. We know that in some countries, this took a bit more time than in other countries. What we have as a hard deadline is next week, 28th of June, because it's when the directive is applicable in all the member states. So the accessibility requirements are becoming mandatory. Next slide. The aim of the European Accessibility Act is to harmonize requirements across Europe, remove barriers in the single market caused by different national rules on accessibility, improve access to everyday products and services, promote innovation and economic benefit for manufacturers because there are single market access solutions, and support the EU commitments under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Next. What are the products that are under the scope? In terms of products, we have consumer general purpose hardware systems, computers, tablets, laptops, and the operating systems that are making this hardware working for us. So we have software and hardware, payment terminals, the one that you use in shops or hotels, self-service terminals related to the services covered by the directive. This is the banking services when you withdraw money, ticketing machine, check-in machine, and also interactive services terminals providing information. We have also consumer terminal equipment with interactive computing capability for electronic communication services, smartphones, and consumer terminal equipment with interactive computing capabilities using for accessing audiovisual, smart TVs with digital television services, as well as e-readers, e-books. Next. The services that are covered, previous slide, please. The services that are covered are the services needed to access those products, not only, but for example, we have the internet subscriptions, the electronic communication services, services providing access to audiovisual media services, and for example, video on demand, consumer banking services, transfers of money, online banking, e-books in terms of content, e-commerce, when you do shopping online, the website has to be accessible. And we also have specific elements of transport services related to information and ticketing. Next slide. Who must comply? The manufacturers, service providers, importers, and distributors operating in the EU. They have to ensure that the covered products and services meet the accessibility requirements. We have an exception for micro enterprises, the one that have less than 10 employees and that a turnover that is under 2 million. Offering services are exempt. However, in some member states, they might be included. It is a question of proportionality. Next. What are our views on the Accessibility Act? As ANEC, we work for consumers' interest. We work for consumers of all ages and abilities, and that's why we partnered with the European Disability Forum for the adoption of this directive and now for the drafting of the standards. We consider this directive a landmark directive because it's improving the access of products and services for all consumers. The idea and the aim is to have all consumers benefiting from inclusive design and equal access. It is a tool for supporting social inclusion, participation, and independence for persons with disabilities and as consumers in the single market. Next slide. What are the accessibility requirements? There are very detailed accessibility requirements contained in the annexes of the directive. In general, we can say that the products and the services must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those are the 4 principles of accessibility. They have to be designed in order to be compatible with assistive technologies. And there is the principle of access through alternative means where direct access is not possible. However, this is not the priority. The priority is to mainstream accessibility in mainstream products. Next slide. In order to have consumers benefiting from accessible products and services, we support strong market surveillance to ensure that the standards are followed. We also support the systematic collection of consumer feedback to know if there are any accessibility-related complaints. This is one of the obligations of the Act for manufacturers and member states. This data will help policymakers and businesses to improve their products and their services over time, as well as market surveillance actions. Next. What does it mean to strengthen accessibility in practice? We need practical measures to make accessibility meaningful and consistent. We need to ensure that accessibility is defined clearly and applied consistently across the sectors. This is especially the case, for example, of hardware, software, service provision. Accessibility should not only be a design principle, but really a market requirement backed by enforceable obligations. This is the principle of the Accessibility Act, which is a directive with requirements for products to be put on the market. And we are very pleased because the AccessibleEU Center is meant to support the strengthening of accessibility in practice with all the different actions. Next slide. Now, harmonized standards. Fernando will provide detailed information about which standards are going to be developed. I just wanted to remind about the aim of those harmonized standards. They will provide presumption of conformity with the legal requirement. This is why it's important that consumers, persons with disabilities contribute to it. We need to ensure that those standards reflect real user needs. We advocate for the meaningful involvement on consumer persons' disabilities through civil society representation in the bodies developing the standards, the European standardization organizations called ANEC and ETSI. All three of them are involved in the development of those standards. We also call for transparency and balance in the composition of the standardization committees to ensure that consumers and persons with disabilities' voices are not sidelined. Next. The Act is applicable as of next week, as we were mentioning. However, we know that the standards are not going to be ready. They are going to be critical tools for the implementation, but there are some delays. Fernando will explain to us the reasons of the delays and what is foreseen in the meantime. However, we need to express some concerns because we fear that it could have an impact on the on accessibility progress across the EU. This is the aim of this webinar, is to explain to you the situation and to find possible common solutions. Next. I have now finalized my presentation. As mentioned, we will have a final Q&A after Fernando's presentation. So I will now leave the floor to Fernando, and I look forward to your questions. If you already have them, don't hesitate to put them into the Q&A, and we will take them at the end. Fernando, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, Chiara. So my part is on which are the standardization documents that are being developed to support the European Accessibility Act, and very important in this workshop, what's his timeline? First of all, we will need to deal with the issue of what's a standard and why do they matter? Why should I look at standards and its development and not only to legislation, which could be the first question. Well, first of all, what's a standard? A standard is a document that is voluntary, not as the law. The law is not voluntary. You have to fulfill it unless you have some exceptions, like Chiara explained. It reflects, or it should reflect, the consensus of all the relevant stakeholders. This links with what Chiara said about balanced compositions and transparency in the compositions. For example, ANEC is one of the organizations that is always invited to European standardization. And in this case, in these standards under the developed by under this mandate, we also have, for example, the EDF and sometimes also H. So there's besides, when we're talking about national European standards, we also have national delegations. And in the National Mirror Committee of those national delegations, we should have a good mix of all the relevant stakeholders. For example, in Spain, in the National Mirror Committee of those standards, there are mainly associations of persons with disabilities and experts from the industry, which is mostly the most common situation in our country, and they are the ones who decide the national position to those standards. Why do I say the national position? Because a very important feature of standards is that they are developed with clear and transparent processes, and I will highlight with very high consensus rules. More or less 2/3 of the votes needs to be gotten to have a standard being approved. So imagine you need to make sure that what you are writing really is fulfilling the needs and it has the consensus of all these relevant stakeholders and through all the countries of the European Union and more, because the community of CENEL is broader. It's not only limited to the European Union, but it includes many other countries. And it's publicly available, which doesn't mean that it's for free, but it means that you can access it most of the times buying the document. But I have to mention a very important feature, which is that it's developed and approved by a standardization body. So why is this important? They provide a common language to measure and to evaluate performance. They make interoperability able, and they protect consumers because they ensure safety, durability, and market equity. So great professionals and leading business usually have an extensive use of standards. But besides, there's a very strong link between legislation and standards, and any legislation and any regulation can be referenced to standards, which is a very safe path because they show this consensus, and that's the reason why they are mentioned in many legislations. We have a special situation, which is the European Directive and European regulations. In this case, the link between standards and legislation is a tool called harmonized standards. Which are those harmonized? Why are they special? Because they provide the technical specifications needed for a product to respect the EU law, because the directive says some things, but it doesn't have a lot of detail. Sometimes it has, but the standards have more detail. So they complement them and they specify sometimes the requirements that in the law are a bit broader. So if you fulfill those standards, you are sure that you are complying with the having presumption of conformity with that directive. But most important, it needs to be referenced by the European Commission in the official journal of the European Union. That means that the European Commission needs to check that the standard really provides presumption of conformity, and when they say yes, it does, they reference the document in the official journal of the European Union, and that way you can say, well, this is the standard that I can use to cover that. And there's a specific annex in those standards that show the relation between the standard and the essential requirements of the directive. You don't need to fulfill the whole standard, but only from the legal point of view, the clauses mentioned in that annex. So, which are the standards that are being developed supporting the European Accessibility Act? And I have to say that if I don't have time to show all the slides, and I may jump some of them, you will have the slides available, so don't worry about that. First of all, there was a standardization request launched by the European Commission to the...
Sorry,
Yes?
I'm interrupting you because we are seeing some issues. They can't, the participants can't see you. They still see me, and it's not meant like that. Apologies for that.
Sorry?
The cameras, apparently people are still seeing me and not you. So I don't know, I will close my camera, and perhaps this is the reason. Apologies if that was the...
It shouldn't. Can you see me now?
Please put in the Q&A, participants, please put in the Q&A if you can't see Fernando. But I have stopped my camera, and Fernando, please go on.
Okay, so I will go on.
So people still can't see you. We will try to sort it out. Perhaps I will ask the AccessibleEU people to have a look at it.
Maybe if I restart my camera.
But anyhow, you have his very nice voice, so I think we can continue without losing too much time. Apologies for that.
Okay, I will go on. And as I said, if I cannot, let's move. So the standardization request was approved, the European Accessibility Act, was approved in April 2019. It enters into force in a few days, the 28th of June. But and the adoption of this standardization request from the European Commission was in September 2022. So as you can see, there were some years between the directive and the standardization request of the European Commission to the European Standardization Organization, ANEC and ANEC. These standardization requests asking for the harmonized standard has some deadlines. And for new standards, new harmonized standards, the deadline is between the 15th of March 2026 and the 15th of January 2027. For the revision of existing standards, it was 15 September of 2025. And for the revision of the existing technical reports, 15th of January 2026. So as you can see from the start, the deadlines for these standards were after the date of entry into force of the European Accessibility Act. Which is the usual flowchart of these ENs. So first we have a new work item where we decide the title, the scope, all of the things, then a first draft, then an inquiry draft, which is a document that is submitted to national vote. I have to highlight that in order to be sure that the national vote reflects the consensus, that takes 3 months and a half. But sorry, 3 months. But besides, there are some translations that need to be done, so the process might take like 6 months and a half. Then we have after that, if it passes the vote, it goes later. It needs to be modified according to the comments received, and then it is launched to a formal vote. And that formal vote is the second national vote. And this stage takes 1 month for the editorial issues and 2 months for the vote. And then we have the final check of the EN and the publication. It can take 3 months, and then the European Commission revises the EN, and if it's satisfactory, it is referenced in the DOE, in the official journal of the European Union. So that means that more than 1 year of the time allocated for drafting of an EN is dedicated to the vote, and it's a very important part of the process because it's when we check that the countries are happy with what is selected, what is set there, and the national stakeholders at national level are happy with what is shown there, or if they have comments, where they can prepare the comments for that document. So what happens is if European standard is not referenced in the official journal of the European Union, well, there's an expiration date, which is 15 September 2027. So if a standard is not in place after that, it cannot be considered a harmonized standard. So if we don't fulfill that, the European Commission may adopt implementing acts establishing technical specifications. We will try that not to happen. So which are the general standards that we are developing? First of all, we are developing 3 standards related to design for all. One is a revision of the existing standard. Then there's another one on the accessibility of non-digital information related to products and services, and a third one on the accessibility of support services for products and services. This has been developed in the Senselect Joint Technical Committee 12 on Design for All. The chairperson is Florent Orsoni from France, and the secretary is SIS, the national standards body of Sweden. And here, first we have, I'm going to be very fast here. In this standard on the Design for All, which is a revision, the original deadline was 15 September of 2025, but it's going to have a quite big delay because of different issues. The first draft wasn't produced until the 20th of November of 2024. And it was the first draft. The inquiry draft is going to be produced has been produced the 12th of June of this year. So as I said, there will be some delay. So it's expected not to be ready until July, September 2026. On the one on digital information, the deadline was the 15th of March 2026. And this has the prenormative works have already been developed. They are already in first draft stages, and so there's expecting a bigger delay and expected to be ready around May 2027. A similar situation is around the document on accessibility of support services for products and services. Those are the general standards. Then we have ICT-related standards, which is an important core of the European Accessibility Act. Here we have three documents. The first one is the key standard, which is the standard on accessibility of ICT products and services, 301549, which is an old friend of ours because it was developed the first edition is for many years ago. Then we have a revision of a technical report that is going to deal on accessibility award criteria and conformity assessment, and also a standard on the interoperability and accessibility of emergency communications. Okay, what's happening here? First, on the standard on ICT accessibility, I have to say that the deadline is the 15th of September of 2025, and also this document is very well advanced. We are already working with version 15, which was produced on May of this year. A new draft is expected to be launched at the end of August, but the approval vote is expected to start in October 2025, ending in January 2026. So if there's no technical comments there, the document could be published in February 2026. Okay, I was saying that this is a very important standard for the European Accessibility Act, and so the deadline is the 15th of September 2025. But also this document is very well advanced. We are working on version 15, which was produced in May of this year, and the new draft will be produced at the end of August. Because we are going to have a meeting in September. The national approval vote is not expected to start until October 2025, ending at the end of January 2026, which means that if there's no national technical comment, strong comment, the publication could take place in 2026, in February 2026. But if a formal vote is needed, we could be talking about publishing the document in June 2026, which means that it will have a delay of between 5 to 9 months. This is being drafted by the Senselect ETSI, Joint Technical Body on Accessibility, but this bill is led effectively by ETSI-TC Human Factors, where the chair is Ulrike Harrich, the vice chair is Matthias Schneider, and the rapporteur is Mike Pluck. So, as you say, this document could have some delay. If I have time, I go to the details later, but I will proceed with the other documents. Then there's another document, which is a technical report on providing guidelines to public procurement of ICT products and services, mainly giving guidelines on accessibility award criteria and conformity assessment. This is a document that is merging two existing documents, which were also technical reports from 2014. It was the first edition. And it's merging these two documents, and it has been validated by experts related to the procurement process, mostly public procurers, in a workshop. And it's important to highlight that this is not a technical report. This is not a harmonized standard. And so it will not contain requirements. It will contain recommendations, but it will be very useful for public procurement. So here we are not having a lot of delay, because the deadline was 15 January 2026. The first draft was produced in November 2024. The second draft was produced in April 2025. And right now, this is being commented by the national delegations and by the ETSI members. And the third draft will be produced at the end of August of this year. So the approval vote will take place between October and January of 2026 at 2025 and 2026. So the publication is expected to take place the 15th of March of 2026. That means that it will have 2 months of delay, and that delay was due to bureaucratic issues, not to any technical issue. This is being drafted by a working group chaired by Susanna Laurin, who is also the chair of ECTC Senselec ETSI Joint Technical Body on E-Accessibility, and Une, myself, I am the secretary of this Joint Technical Body. But there's also a very important document, which is 31919, which is the harmonized standard for the accessibility and interoperability of emergency communications and for the answering of emergency communications by the public safety answering points, including the 112. This is great because no delay is expected. This group, ECTC, no, sorry, I have written there ECTC Human Factors, but it's really ECTC MTEL, sorry. Let me correct it. So ECTC MTEL is producing that, and his chair is Cristina Lumbreras from the European Emergency Number Association. And no delay is expected here. They have followed a very interesting approach, which is that first they produce a technical report, and now they are turning that technical report into a harmonized standard. Then we have the built environment, and you will say, why the built environment? Is that covered by the European Accessibility Act? Because it covers some products, some services. What happened with the built environment? Well, there's an article 4.4 of the European Accessibility Act that says member states may decide in the light of national conditions that the built environment used by clients of services covered by this directive shall comply with the accessibility requirements set out in Annex 3 in order to maximize their use by persons with disabilities. And what does that Annex 3 says? So, as you can see, your country may have decided, I'm talking in the past, because the transpositions have already taken place. So maybe your country, for example, in Spain, our government decided to include Annex 3 in the transposition of the European Accessibility Act. Some other countries haven't done so. So if your country has included Annex 3 in the transposition of the directive, then when a service is provided, when any of the services of the European Accessibility Act is provided, and that service is under the responsibility of the service provider, the accessibility of the areas intended for public access for the provision of that service shall be accessible. And so this includes the use of related areas, the approach of the buildings, the toilets, and many other things. So it affects the built environment. So there was already a very important European standard on the accessibility and usability of the built environment, which provided technical that is being revised to accommodate the requirements for the European Accessibility Act. So everything is the changes to be able to incorporate the European Accessibility Act are given in a new Annex A, And that Annex A, the one that that you need to check if you want to fulfill the European Accessibility Act. When we are talking about the deadlines, the deadline was 15 September 2025. We are currently developing phase 1, which is up to after the first national vote. The first draft was produced in September 2024. The inquiry draft was produced on April 2025. The inquiry vote will start in mid-June and will last until mid-October 2025. So that first draft will be launched in mid-October, in mid-November 2025, which means that we are expecting minimum 1 year of delay for this standard. This standard is being developed by Sensele JTC 11, where Jesus Hernández Galán from Fundación 11, and who is the leader of AccessibleEU, is the chair, and also in a working group 1, which is where the convener is Nieves Peinado from Spain, from the CEAPAT, and UNE is the secretary of these two technical committees. Another issue that I would like to highlight is that all those documents are interrelated. I mean, the standard on ICT accessibility needs to make reference to the document on the accessibility of the emergency services. The standard on the ICT accessibility of ICT products and services needs to make reference to the standard on accessibility of the built environment. The standard on ICT accessibility is interrelated also with the standard on support services. But the problem is that with harmonized standards, they can only make reference to published and dated documents in the harmonized requirements, which has created some problems because as all those documents are being produced at the same time and are under development, they cannot make reference to them. So it's an important problem that maybe it will make important to have future revisions of these standards to solve and to improve the inter-references between those documents. So in summary, none of those documents will be published before the entry into force of the European Accessibility Act. This is mainly because the deadlines given in the standardization request already are after that entry into force. Besides, there are initial delays because of different issues of the complexity of the project, of the consensus building, of the project, which is always difficult and very demanding because of the conflicts with national documents, because of the need of having dedicated experts to progress on the drafts. So there are many reasons why those documents are having more or less delay. As you have seen, there's only one document which will be produced on time according to the standardization request, not according to the directive. So the simplest and easiest way to show conformity with the essential requirements of the directive will be complying with those harmonized standards. However, what happens in between in this period where we still don't have those harmonized standards in place? You can always check the drafts, but I think that right now the most important thing is that the requirements are very clearly defined in the directive. So you need to make sure that you fulfill the requirements of the directive. It will be much easier when we have the harmonized standards in place, but for the time being, until they are in place and referenced in the official journal of the European Union, what you need to do is focus on the requirements that are given there in the directive and make sure that your product or service fulfill the directive, because they have already quite a lot of detail there. The sensor requirements, as I said, are already quite defined, but the more desirable thing will be to having the harmonized standards as soon as possible in place, which is what the national standards bodies and the European standards organizations are working, trying to make that possible. But as I said, it is being hard because of all these difficulties, mainly of the consensus and having agreements between so many countries and so many organizations. As I said, this is part of the AccessibleEU project, so we are contributing to standardization with providing our comments as AccessibleEU to these technical committees and disseminating this content in order to make everybody aware of these documents that are going to be very important for all our communities. And I think that we can go to the Q&A part. As I said, there were more detail in the presentations. They will be distributed later. And if you have any specific question on what Chiara or me said, we can move on.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And yes, we have received already quite some few questions, so I will go through them one by one, and together we will answer. First of all, we have a provocative question, I would say. Is it normal to have a standard but not a methodology to respect and test it after? The answer is no, because a standard, harmonized standard, has to contain a methodology for the testing. And Fernando, you would like to tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, I mean, there's, for example, in the most important standard, from my point of view, on supporting the European Accessibility Act, the standard on ICT accessibility, where HCTC human factors are leading the drafting. That document, from the very beginning, has a test and for each of the requirements given there. That's a very good sample. And for other standards, for example, for the one on the built environment, I can tell you that there is another document which has already been produced on conformity assessment, and you can on how to check and how to the conformity assessment of relevant to that standard. So in principle, there are most important. All the requirements given in the harmonized standard are objective verifiable, which is very important. They always have you always have to need to be able to say yes or not, I'm fulfilling that.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And again, to repeat that the role of a harmonized standard is to have a testing methodology. So it's criteria which are reproducible and repeatable in an objective manner. This is really the legal definition. So the standards will contain it. And if they don't, or you think they don't, please let us know, and let also your public authorities know, because the standard then can't have its function of harmonized standard. Now, let's move to e-accessibility. And we have a user of the WCAG guidelines for the website e-commerce. And what is the link with the draft standard on ICT accessibility? Will it be the same, or is it a little bit different, Fernando?
Well, that's a great question. That standard 31549 has always been aligned with WCAG, always, with every of the editions. And in fact, many of the requirements given in the European standard are a direct reference to the requirements given in WCAG. Having said this, the standard is broader than WCAG. There are some elements, for example, for documents and for other things that are not covered by WCAG and therefore need to be developed in 31549. So 31549 is broader than WCAG, but at the same time, if you are already fulfilling with WCAG, you are on the safe side because they are fully aligned, and there's a close working with W3C, which is the consortium responsible of WCAG, in order to make sure that there's no contradiction, but the standard is broader. There's a very important clause in the EN, I think, an annex. I think it's Annex D. You can check it in the slide that we will distribute. But there's a very important annex in 31549 which explains how to use it. And in that explanation, you can find a lot of information on where do you need to look for what and which are the differences and why this is broader.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Then we move to the next question. And this is about understandable principle. How does it relate to visual media, especially in relation to blind and visual impaired audiences? Again, I think we can refer to the annexes of the directive, which they contain very detailed information about it. But Fernando, would you like to already explain how this principle of understandable and understandability has been taken into account in the ICT standard, for example?
Yes, there are specific requirements on the speed of the voice. I mean, there are special requirements on technical requirements on how you can make sure that the message, the audio message is understandable. There are other technical issues, but this is covered by 30154 line. Yes.
Thank you
I
very
cannot
much.
give you. I don't feel comfortable explaining the technical details because I'm not an expert on ICT accessibility, and I can say something that is not completely right. But I can tell you that there are specific requirements related to that.
Thank you very much. We then have a question about the scope of application. Does it apply to newsletters or apps, so to the provision of information? And the answer is that it depends what this website is containing, because the idea is that it is a website that is providing a service, or that you can buy a product from, against economic transaction. Now, if you have an app or a newsletter which is totally without any commercial links or any commercial functions, I would say very likely not. But in reality, to have a newsletter or an app that doesn't have an economic function is very rare. So for me, it's really a question, or even a website, a magazine, or a web paper. You have a lot of advertisement, you have a lot of possibility of interactive services. So nowadays, A4 document newsletter doesn't exist a lot anymore. So that's the interpretation I would give. Fernando, do you have additional elements?
I will only want to enlarge it a bit, which is that let me remember you all that the Web Facility Directive is already in place, and it affects public websites and public mobile apps. So for that situations, the 301.549 is already the harmonized standard. So maybe your website doesn't need to fulfill with the European Accessibility Act, but it might need to fulfill with the Web Accessibility Directive.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And now we have a long question, but I think it's a very relevant one, on the definition of use for electronic communication services, and which product in the chain of provision of electronic communication services is covered or not. The example, is a router, a modem covered or not, or is it only the final hardware, such as the smartphone device, the projectors? And because of course it makes a difference. And again, I would say it's the interface with the consumers, but it is also the compatibility with assistive technologies or other technologies that are used to provide the final service to the consumers. The consumer terminal equipment with interactive computing capability for electronic communication services is defined in the directives, and then also you can understand it through the accessibility requirements, but it is really the final interface with the consumers and persons with disabilities that is the guiding principle. Fernando, you are okay?
I think that you have fulfilled the whole answer. So
Thank you very much. We have another very interesting question about a Slovenian case.
Hi, Matthias.
So there is an appropriate law on accessibility, which I imagine is a transposition of the directive. But there are no specific requirements of the guidelines. Indeed, the standards we just heard are late. And there is a specific case about total conversation. What you recommend in this case? How should they prepare for the regulation? Should they wait for the document? So Fernando, would you like to repeat again what's happening for the late standards? Although total conversation is also contained in 112, I believe.
Matthias, I know him. He's one of the experts working on the 31549 revision and working on the total conversation document. So, Matthias, you know the issue much better than me. I cannot give advice on how to prepare a regulation on this. In fact, even in the interpretation of the directive, I don't feel comfortable because it's very broad and in the end, the only organization, the only entity that can interpret that directive is the Court of Justice of the European Union. So I I think, Matthias, you know those documents much better than me. I cannot give you an answer to that.
Thank you very much. We have now a question also about the late availability of the standard, or let's say about the obligation to apply the directive next week, and then the fact that the standards are not ready. The question is yes, about the late availability. And Fernando, you want to repeat again for all standards that are going to be late, what are the possibility for manufacturers to comply with the legislation?
I mean, it's bad news that the standards are not in place. It's bad news for all of us. But because the standards will make things easier for us. But first of all, the standard is never the only way to show conformance with the directive. You can always use an alternative way, which is more complicated. But the important thing is that it would be great if we have the documents on time, but they are not going to be on time. And in the meantime, you are already, well, from the 28th of this month, you will be obliged to fulfill the directive. So I don't know what I think that what you need to do is check the directive, check if you are already fulfilling it, and if not, make sure that you are fulfilling what's said there. The ideal thing will be having the standards in place because that would make things easier for all of us. But since they are not, you need to study very well the directive and check if you are fulfilling it.
Thank you very much. We have a very interesting question about the EAA as a minimum harmonization directive, it's the technical legal term, and how to comply in all the specific countries. So if the standards are voluntary, it's not enough to comply with the WCAG or the EN 301549. We need a clear methodology to comply for all countries together and for each of them separately. It's not as easy as such. So first of all, indeed, it is a minimum harmonization directive, so you can have higher requirements at the national level. However, they have to be justified because we are in the effect of harmonization. We want to create a single market. The standards are going to be providing access condition to the single market. If you have national rules that provide a higher level, they're very likely the standards will contain what is called an A deviation, that is mentioning the rules that you have to apply at the national level. There is a little lack of asymmetry in the harmonization, but out of experience, this is quite rare. So I don't think you have to worry about it. And when the directive was discussed, a lot of studies were made to see whether there are additional and higher requirements. And now that we are entering into the application phase, we know that there are not so many. So, and there are mechanisms to take that into account also in standardization. Fernando, that's fine.
Just to complement one thing, which because it says that if the standards are voluntary, is not enough. Well, the standards will always be voluntary, but the important thing for the relation with the directive is the Annex Set A or Annex Set B or Annex Set C, which is giving you ways to fulfill the essential requirements. But the standards will always be voluntary, yes, but which doesn't mean that it's not enough to fulfill with the directive. If you fulfill with the applicable requirements of the relevant stated in the Annex Set A, B, or C, whatever is the name, you will be fulfilling that part of the directive.
Thank you very much. We have another very interesting question about consumer complaints. So I would like to refer to Article 29 of the directive about enforcement, where it is written that member states have to collect those complaints. It is up to each national authority to organize it, but I would like also to refer you to the European Disability Forum toolkit for the implementation of the directive at the national level, which contain also very relevant information on how to collect feedback and how to provide it. We are reaching the end, so I will perhaps go very quickly through the other questions. Fernando, I hope you can stay with us some additional minutes, dear participants, because we have a question about a grace period after 28th of June. What if a product is not accessible? Well, first of all, you have to look at the specific deadlines in the directive. There are some products which have a longer implementation deadline, but otherwise you have to discuss it at the national level with your market surveillance authorities. From a legal point of view, no, there is no grace period because the directive was approved in 2019. It was it entered into force transposition by member states in 2022. We are 2025. There is enough time to get familiar with it and to respect it. The fact the standards are not ready is very annoying, but it's not a reason not to comply. This is my legal answer. Then we move to EN 17161. Some companies have started certifying products, but the standard is not ready yet. Fernando?
Yes, because right now they are working on the revision of that EN, and it's changing. So that document is changing, but there are people. The document, the original document, was produced a few years ago, and some people are having certifications against that edition. So, but that certifications are against the first edition of that EN. So not, of course, not against the current edition, which is right now under progress.
Thank you very much. We have another interesting question about hearing technologies and avoid interferences with assistive devices. We have a product manufacturer of phone, and they want to know which standard they have to follow. They mention an ANSI standard, which is an American one. And I would say if you want to put a product on the European market, you need to follow the European rules. And of course, you can show compliance by mentioning different kinds of technical specifications, especially in the absence of harmonized standards. But at the end of the day is that you follow the European rules. I'm not familiar with this ANSI technical specification or these FCC hack standards. They can't be used for legal provision of presumption of conformity, but they can help you in your technical file. If you want to put your product on the market, it is then up to the market surveillance authorities to decide whether it's in conformance or not with the European law, in this case, the European Accessibility Act. And then we had a question which I also had noted because it was in before we had the power cut of our webinar about the product labeling and the packaging. So Fernando, we have a question. There is an accessibility requirement for information of products and the packaging itself. Will the standard cover also packaging? Do we have another one?
There's the standardization request includes one of the standards that I mentioned very fast at the beginning when I talk about the general standards. There's a standard on non-digital information, and it includes this information that is given in the package. But there's not a specific standard for package. There's the standard for design for all. There's the standard for non-digital information. Those are the ones that I understand will cover that.
Thank you very much. We then have a comment on the WCAG 2 version about non-web software. You were discussing it at the beginning, so thank you very much for the additional information. We move again to ICT standard. So the standard will be finalized later. There is a gap, so can the present standard be used as a reference? Again, what happened during this period where we don't have harmonized standard? Should we use the national standard or the European directive or the national legislation? Difficult, but we have rules. Fernando, so I can tell from a legal point of view, the directive applies. That's it, 28th of June, European law. National law, unless it is providing a higher level of accessibility, should not apply anymore and shouldn't exist. But the harmonized standard is not ready. And so what is the solution, Fernando?
As I said, the solution is study if you are fulfilling that or not. With 31549, there are many parts that haven't had a very, very big change. There are parts where there are big changes. For example, regarding real-time text, there's a very big change from the previous edition, and there are also additions. But since it's very linked to WCAG, I had to say that it's WCAG and the previous editions of 31549 could be a safe way to approach, but there might be, well, there will be some parts of the European Accessibility Act that will not be covered by the current edition, because if not, we would have needed a revision of the EN, and we are reviewing it. So it's a safe path, but there are things that will not be covered with the current edition.
And again, you can use it as a useful document, so the present version, in your declaration of conformity, but it doesn't have any legal effect. That's what is important for you to know. Then again, another question on the scope of application and about emails. And I would say emails are generally considered electronic communication services. They are contained in operating systems for computers and mobile phones. And my understanding is that they should be accessible. We also have a question about with the delays because someone, of course, was cut out because of the power cut. Apologies again. With all the delays, when exactly will devices be required to be compliant? 28th June, so next week, that's how it is. And then we have another question about invoices, very interesting. So by an electronic service provider, will insurance be accessible? Invoices are part of a economic transaction of e-commerce. It's our understanding that they should be accessible. However, I know that there is also legislation, European legislation and standards about invoicing. I understand there might be a difference between B2B and B2C, and that has to be taken into account. We then can move to the alternative way to show compliance for website and apps. I think we have covered it already, Fernando. So I think we have done it. And then we will have the different application every country until summer. All this because you don't say, sorry, we are late in the standard, we apply 1 year later. That's not as easy as such. The EU is not late in the standards, is the standardization organizations which are late in the standard. And Fernando, would you like to explain or just say again how this was about?
I mean, it's a mixture of many things.
We moved to built environment. We didn't have it so far. Do you think that the future modification that the EAA could be revised and included from Fundación Once? And Fernando, I suppose that we would support it.
Yes, but I have no idea, Jose Luis. I don't know if the European Accessibility Act will be modified to include Annex 3 in the future. I have no idea on what will go on with that.
Yeah, we
But
also
I have to say that as far as I know, few countries have have transposed Annex 3, the annex on the accessibility of the built environment.
We also have to say that because it is just entering into application, it's not likely it will be revised anywhere soon. However, from a ANEC point of view and also a disability movement point of view, I must say this was one of our original requests and we will continue to push for it. Final question about e-accessibility again. So what about accessibility statement for website and mobile apps? Like for the Web Accessibility Directive, do we also have it for the EAA and the relative standard, Fernando?
As far as I know, this part should be covered by 31549. I hope not to say something wrong, but as far as I know, I think this should be covered by 31549.
Super, many thanks. I think we've done all our questions. As mentioned, it was our commitment to do so. We were a bit quick, so I hope our commissioner was fine with us rushing at the end. Please have a look at the feedback form that AccessibleEU would like you to fill in. It is in the chat, the link. They would like to improve these services. Again, our apologies for today because there was a power cut from the meeting organizers, as you have noticed, and also we had some issues with the cameras. I think now everything has been sorted out. And we would like to thank you very much for your participation and very active questions. We hope you have a clear understanding of how the European Accessibility Act works and the role of the standards. Fernando, thank you very much. Would you like to say goodbye?
Thanks a lot, Chiara. Just thanks a lot for all of you who have been there wanting to improve and to make your products and services more accessible. So thanks a lot and good luck.
So again, thank you very much also to the AccessibleEU for hosting this webinar. We can also give you a new appointment on the 2nd and especially the 3rd of July in Brussels. There will be a big conference from the AccessibleEU project. Many of us will be present there, so it's the occasion to see each other. There will be discussions on the new obligations and what it means in practice. Also from all kinds of stakeholders. There will be consumers, persons with disabilities, industry, public authorities, the European Commission. You will find the invitation on the AccessibleEU website, and we will put the slides there as well. Again, thank you very much for your patience to be a bit later today, and have a very nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.